Hey y'all, welcome to Pleiadian Point of View. I'm Peyton, and I'm a Pleiadian channel and starseed coach. So, in today's POV, the Pleiadians wanted to talk to us about how to take back control over our reality. Because as they look out at our human collective, they're noticing that a lot of us are pretty freaked out right now. So, in today's video, they're going to tell us how to start turning that around, and they're going to share a simple process with us for doing that. But before we jump into talking about how to take back control over your reality, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and the like button if you haven't done that yet. So if you are one of the many people who is feeling a bit like you're on a runaway train right now, like the world has kind of lost its collective mind and you're powerless to do anything about it, the P's are talking to you in today's video. Because as they are looking at our human collective, as our 3D matrix gets more and more unstable, it can look like our outside world, like that external reality, is kind of turning into a dumpster fire. So the P's wanted to help us reframe this and understand energetically what is going on and how we can remove ourselves from the runaway train. So, for most of us, as we're going about our daily life and hearing about all the just really distressing and disturbing things that are happening in the world right now, we tend to fall into our 3D way of processing things. And of course, the 3D system is what most of us have been operating in for the majority of our lives, but we are not in that operating system anymore. So most of us will kind of go back to our old way of reacting to things, just kind of on autopilot. So for most of us, when we see or hear something that we find very upsetting, the first thing that our ego mind does is try to separate us from that thing. So you may notice if you are listening to a story of something that's going on in the world, that the first thing your mind does is want to make it bad, to put that label of judgment on that story or that person that you're hearing about. We want to make that person the bad guy. We want to characterize that event as a bad thing. And this is very natural, because some of the things that are happening right now, it's hard to think of them as anything other than bad. Let's be honest. But what happens as the ego mind tries to respond to the world around us is it takes us deeper and deeper into separation. Because you may notice as you hear that upsetting story on the news or see something posted on social media, that your whole physical body kind of recoils from it. You can actually feel yourself kind of tightening up into a little ball, trying to get away from that thing, that story. It's like our entire mind-body system rejects it. We don't want it to get on us, right? So we pull away from it. And this is very natural. This is just the automatic reaction of the 3D body-mind system. This is that reaction that lets us have a 3D physical experience. So we needed that reaction of the ego mind, that pulling back, that trying to get away from it, that making it bad. It was necessary for us to have the 3D experience, play the 3D game. But what happens as we continue to stay in this old operating system, and we always have the free will to do that, what happens is we keep ourselves in a 3D timeline. So if we are looking at the things that are happening in the world that are really tragic and very distressing, and we allow the ego mind to do what it's used to doing, what happens is the ego mind jumps into judgment. It starts telling us that can happen to us, that that bad thing is going to come into our reality. It puts us in that survival mode of fear. And those survival emotions of fear and anger and guilt and powerlessness are really, really powerful emotions. So those create a very strong energetic reaction in us. So if we stay in our old 3D program of responding to things like this by separating ourselves from it, making it wrong, getting into anger and fear about it, we anchor ourselves to a 3D timeline, because we're keeping ourselves in separation from that thing. from that person that we view as the bad guy. So what the P's wanted to offer us is a way to kind of flip this on its head. Because for most of us, if we've been doing our spiritual work for a while, what we truly want in these situations is to dissolve this from our reality so that no one has to go through these things. We want to really eliminate these behaviors of abuse and suffering from the entire collective. But we don't really know how to do that. Right? So what the P's wanted to offer us in today's video is a way to do that, a way to start releasing these things from the entire human experience. And the way we do that is we have to get out of the old 3D way of reacting. So then how do we flip that on its head? How do we operate and respond to these things from a higher dimensional perspective? Well, according to the P's, we do the exact opposite of the 3D approach. So if the 3D approach is all about separating, right? Trying to pull away from that thing, get it out of our experience so that it doesn't get on us. The opposite of that is to actually merge with these things, right? So what is the opposite of separation? It's union. So how do we do that? Well, the way that we start reacting to some of these things that are either happening in our personal life or that we're seeing in the world around us is by starting to reclaim them as our creation. Because the ego mind wants to say, that's not me. I would never do that, right? You can almost hear yourself as you listen to some of these, really scary things that are happening in the world right now. We wonder what is wrong with people. But if we want to really start to take control of our reality and change our reality, not just for ourselves, but for every other human on the planet, we have to start to be inclusive. That's the opposite of 3D separation. So the way the P's always encourage us to do this is to start bringing these things into our heart. Because anything that we are seeing that we are kind of labeling as a negative thing happening either in our life or in the world around us is just a reflection of our energy. And the P's talk about this all the time, right? We know that everything that is happening in our external world, everything that seems to be out there is just a reflection of us. It is our energy being reflected to us, which tells us we have the power to change it, right? If you created it, you can uncreate it. So how do you do that without getting into resistance, without getting into that 3D ego separation? Because a lot of this stuff, y'all, we don't want to have anything to do with it. So you may even be having a triggering reaction right now as I talk about the possibility of merging with these things. It may be sending you into kind of a fight or flight reaction, going, oh my God, I don't want that anywhere near me. But what happens as we start to reclaim and merge with these things through that simple process that the P's talk about all the time, bringing it into your heart, what happens is you start to take responsibility for your creation. Because remember, everything is your creation. If you are seeing it in the world, if it is showing up in your life, it is your creation. Now, that doesn't mean you created it with your conscious mind. Super important thing to understand. So when a lot of us hear this, our first reaction is the P's are crazy. I would never create war in my reality by choice. I would never create suffering and lack in my reality by choice. But what is happening is we do most of our creation from an unconscious level. So we are absolutely creating everything we see reflected in our reality. And when we start to pull these things back into our heart, so say you're listening to a story about something that is really horrible that's going on in the world. And instead of pushing it away, as we are going to be tempted to do, the ego mind system, y'all, is very powerful. Your ego mind is going to fight you when you want to try to change how you respond, because the ego wants to keep you separated, wants to keep you in 3D. That's what it knows. And the ego is all about keeping you in the familiar. So when you start to change this and start to want to dissolve these things from your reality, hold these things into your heart and send them love. Even the most repulsive things that are happening in our world right now are our creation. So as we pull these things, these news stories, these global events, these things that may be popping up as manifestations in your life, pulling them into your heart, you reclaim these pieces of your creation. And as you do that, you break down the resistance around them. And it is only our resistance to things that keep them in our experience. So if we want to release these things from our broader human reality, what we see out there, we have to release them from inside. It's an inside job every single time. So when you see that story and you pull that news story into your heart, you send love to everyone who is involved with it on both sides of the equation, even those ones that you want so much to label as bad guys. When you pull that into your heart, you send it love to everyone involved in the situation. What happens is you break down the resistance to that template, to that energy. And as you start to release the resistance, because you are reclaiming the hardest to love parts of yourself when you do this, because all those things that we see as people acting out in the world right now are reflections of the parts of us that have acted out. And when you start to reclaim that, accept ownership for your creation, take responsibility for being the creator of that thing, which we absolutely are, as hard as it is for our ego mind to accept that, you start to break down the resistance. You start to forgive the part of you that created that. And one of the reasons that we feel so much resistance when we hear these stories of, really upsetting things happening in the world is because at an unconscious level, we are blaming the part of ourselves that created it. Because from the higher level of our consciousness, we know it's all us. So as you start to take responsibility for the most negative and terrible things that you're seeing in the world as your creation, you start to dissolve the resistance around that topic. So you start to break down the template of war. You start to break down the template of suffering, of poverty, of disease, when you start to reclaim those things that you're judging. Now, another really interesting thing happens as you start to try this process of bringing these things into your heart, especially those things that you're looking around and they look like some of the most terrible things you could possibly imagine. Because as you bring these things into your heart, you are starting to heal your parallel lifetimes. Because this is not the first rodeo for any of us. Our soul is infinite and powerful. And the P's always like to talk about how most light workers and starseeds are extremely experienced and advanced souls. And because of this, we have lived everywhere and we have done everything, which means we have had lifetimes where we were the ones doing these bad things. And part of us is rejecting those aspects of ourselves from parallel lifetimes that were the bad guys. Right? So as we start to pull what we see as these terrible things going on in the world into our heart, the other thing that you're doing, other than processing and breaking down the energy, is you're calling back all the pieces of your soul, all of your energy that has been fractured off because you have rejected those lifetimes where you were the one being the abuser, the violator, the oppressor. And so we have fractured ourselves and fractured our energy over many, many parallel lifetimes where we were the ones that we perceived to be doing the bad things. So as we start to pull these things into our heart and send them love, send it forgiveness, you're actually recalling the fractured pieces of your energy, of your soul. And this is very, very powerful because as you start to release this resistance, this pushing against, you start to break down that thing, whatever the storyline is that you're working on, not only in your reality, and that's one of our big goals, right? We want to release these things from our reality. So we're not getting that reflection anymore. But what happens is, as you start to bring these really big kind of negative stories into your heart, is you're breaking it down for the entire human collective so that no other human who ever will live on this planet or is living on this planet will have to deal with this. So this is one of the biggest ways to be of service right now is by breaking down these negative storylines of kind of what it means to be human, or at least 3D humans. This is how you break out of that matrix cage. Because as you pull these storylines into your heart, you are using your free will By accepting responsibility for these things as your creation, you're using your free will to opt out of the 3D matrix. But if you let yourself continue to respond the way your mind-body system wants you to respond, by getting into fear, getting into anger, pushing that thing away, you keep yourself anchored in a 3D timeline. You use your free will to vote for 3D, for separation, to keep these things in your reality. Because as we all know, the more you try to resist something, the more you superglue it to yourself. So this is the way that we undo this. And that is by just bringing these things into your heart. Rather than fighting them, pushing them away, bringing them into your heart and sending love to everyone who's involved. And as you do this, you start to use your free will to break down the 3D matrix, because you are using your free will to vote for a different operating system, to vote for unity, for peace, for the opposite of all these things that we have been really fighting so hard against. So the more you do this practice, if you start to use this for every little thing that comes up in your life that is triggering to you, that you perceive to be negative, you reclaim the energy, you take responsibility for your creation, which the ego mind wants no part of, y'all. So expect a little bit of a temper tantrum from the ego mind as you start to do this, because the ego mind is going to want to tell you, oh, this is a bad idea. You're going to get it on you if you do this. But really, the ego mind doesn't know what it's talking about. So if you try this little process, what happens is you start to break down the 3D matrix for the entire planet. And what is more powerful of a way of taking back control over your reality than that? So that is what the P's wanted to share in today's POV, to just offer us an alternative path to take back responsibility for our entire reality. And you are absolutely powerful enough to do this. You were born to do this. So this is how we can take back control over a time in our lives right now where things look a little powerless for a lot of people. So anyway, that is what the P's wanted to share with us. As always, if you want to learn all these cool tools that the P's talk about in these videos, don't forget to hit the link in the description to work with me one-on-one. I'll see you next time. Bye, y'all.